Hello, Pick'ems enjoyers. Before we do get into our elimination stage, we're going to quickly go over the opening stage. But first, if we could please have a moment of silence for everybody's fallen Pick'ems, I'd appreciate that, including my own. Thank you. If you're able to avoid the Pick'ems purge, congratulations. I think Diamond is going to be very, very rare for this major, and you should definitely flaunt that as best as you can. But don't flex just yet, because the elimination stage is going to ramp up the difficulty significantly, I personally feel. My opening stage, I got 2 correct out of 10, which is the worst I've ever done, not even close. In some of the previous ones where I've got it wrong by like 1. I've got 4 out of 9 or whatever was required at the time. This is the worst I've done, hands down, not even close. Some teams really shone and surprised me. Legacy in particular. The Americas Are Mars, I thought they were a shoe-in for a 0-3. I thought it was like the easiest pick of my life, and they proved me wrong. They didn't make it, but Cold Zero winding back the years, performing so much higher than I thought they would. Pain really hurt me, man. It really did, because Jackie and I have casted them a lot over these last few months, and I have been believing in them. Even in my Fantasy League video, which I'll be making another one soon for the HLTV Fantasy League, I even said Koaz is a really good pick for the amount of money that he was worth, like 187k or something like that. And I was thinking about picking him up, and I was backing Payne to do well. In my first initial draft, I had Payne to even make it through to the next stage, and I talked myself out of it, and I put Saw and Apex over the top of him. So I'm gutted about that, but I'm really happy for them. Big Azera, probably the best player of the opening stage, consistently, as an IGL, as a fragger, amazing. But then the real big disappointments, Ents, shadow of their former selves. Diha had a shocking tournament here. I think he was one of the worst players in terms of statistics. It's ever since the contract extension, man. Like, he got the contract extension with Ents and he just dropped off the edge of a cliff. His performances have been very lackluster ever since Katowice. Apex was super disappointing as well. It seemed like the head wasn't fully in the game. And even though Furia made it through, I'll talk about this in a few moments' time when I go in for my elimination stage pick'ems. It was by the skin of their teeth, and they didn't even beat a team that made it this far. They only beat teams, they only played teams that ended up getting knocked out ultimately. So a bit of a rough one for Furia as well. Heroic looked very good, Cloud9 looked really sharp, and so did Eternal Fire. So let's move on to our elimination stage matchups, and we'll be talking about the opening games because this is going to be very important for our pick'ems. And additionally, there are some really tasty opening games here as well. So you have Mouse and Ecstatic, Na'Vi head against the Mongols, Vitality versus Eternal Fire, VP take on Imperial, FaZe and Heroic is an outrageous opening matchup, Complexity and Pain is another really interesting one, Spirit and Cloud9. You could argue this could easily be a playoff game, quarterfinal, semis, maybe even grand finals if you believe in Cloud9 enough. That's an outrageous match. And then G2 Furia is also on paper a really interesting one. So I think if we're looking at this from the perspective of which teams we actually think are going to 3-0, gamble picking now I don't think is worthwhile, only in very small circumstances, and this isn't really one of them. I'm going to be going for the teams I think will genuinely 3-0 and the teams I think are going to go 3-1 or 3-2. My concern here is that FaZe against Heroic, I think, is a very strange and difficult fixture for FaZe to kick things off. I think they are still the favourites. They should still beat Heroic. On paper, they should still come out ahead on that one. But as a first game, that could be a tough one, especially if they have a slow start. So I'm a little bit nervous about putting FaZe as my 3-0, even though they're one of the favourites to win this. I'd say the favourites are probably FaZe, Spirit, and then you're looking at some of the periphery, like Vitality is definitely up there in the shout. I think G2 was a bit of a dark horse with how they played at the RMRs. They looked amazing. Was that a fluke? Was that a one-off? I guess we'll have to think about that one and see it and kind of assess it as it happens. But there's a lot of variables into this one that make me a bit nervous. However, I'm not going to think about this too much. I'm going to pick the teams I think are the best teams here because I thought about it too much in the previous stage and it got me 2 out of 10. I'm going to learn from that one. So I'm going to put Spirit and FaZe as my 3-0 teams. I think they're both difficult opening fixtures. I think Spirit should be beating Cloud9 and FaZe should be beating Heroic, even though Heroic looked pretty damn good in the previous stage. So I'm going for those two. Don't feel great about it, but that's the nature of the new pick'em system. Now into my teams to advance. I think Vitality will advance. I think Heroic will advance. G2 will advance. I think additionally VP will advance. And then this is where it gets quite a bit more difficult because there's quite a few teams that I could justify putting in here as my 3-1 or my 3-2s. Na'Vi, Mouse, Complexity, Cloud9, Eternal Fire has been looking good as well. Hell, I don't even think it's a terrible idea if you went for like Pain to potentially make it through here. I'm definitely not putting them as my 0-3 pick, I'll tell you that much. That could come back to haunt me. And then you have Furia, but I actually don't have much faith in Furia off the basis of those first games. Because as I mentioned before, you look at Furia's games they've played. They played Legacy and Lin Vision, who they lost to. Neither of those teams made it through to the next stage. They beat Koi, Ents, and Saw. None of those teams made it through to the next stage. So I think if you're looking at Furia here, yeah, they made it through by the skin of their teeth, but nothing particularly exciting about them and their prospects coming through. They still have Keserato, Yuri, some really good players, but I don't have much faith in this Furia roster, if I'm being completely honest with you. I think I have to put Mouse in because Mouse are a team that always seem to just fly under the radar a little bit. They don't have the super famous names or brands, I guess, is one of the reasons why. But when you look at their results, it's legit. In the RMRs, they beat Spirit. They beat them 2-0. They beat Ecstatic, who's also in this stage. They had a win against the Guild Eagles. Their only loss in the last 9 weeks is against FaZe, and that was 2-0, and that was a month and a half ago. Wins against Ents, Cloud9, Heroic. They've been beating up on a lot of teams, man. And Broland, since joining Mouse, is like kind of reinvented himself. He's had a resurgence. He's had a resuscitation. He's still a very young guy. He's one of those players that was floating around the Swedish scene for a while that people thought, right, he's the next big thing. And now we're finally starting to see what Broland really has up his sleeve. So I think Mouse are going to be a solid team. Maybe even a 3-0. They play against Ecstatic first, and I think that should be a fairly straightforward win for Mouse. More often than not, that puts them already into that advantageous sort of bracket. So between these three teams I'm looking at right now, I'm going to discount Eternal Fire a little bit, and it could come back to haunt me. But I did see a couple of things in their opening games that left me a little bit underwhelmed. They got a win against Mongols, but Mongols started really slow in this tournament. I'm not going to have them to make it through. As a spoiler, by the way. Additionally, they played against Pain, where they had a good win, and then they got a bit of a scrappy one against Gamer Legion. They didn't get it done as cleanly as they probably wanted to, and for those reasons, I don't think Eternal Fire are quite at the level yet to make it through the elimination stage. They've got a lot of potential, they've got a lot of capabilities, but I do feel like they're just going to come a bit undone when it comes to some of the teams they're playing against, and additionally, they're against Vitality in their first game. So that also makes me a little bit nervous. I think I'm going to have to go for Na'Vi, to be honest with you. I think Na'Vi have a higher ceiling and higher consistency than Complexity or Cloud9. I know some people are going to be very sort of surprised at me not going for Cloud9 to make it through. I've got a few issues with Cloud9. The first being they don't have an out-and-out primary AWPer, which you can get away with in the current meta of CS. You have a lot of closer range maps like Anubis, Ancient, Vertigo, Inferno as well is another map you don't have to have like an out-and-out AWPer. I don't think that by itself is the reason why. I think I'm looking at that team, and Hobbit had a couple of great performances. He actually did great for me in my fantasy league, and he was super, super on point. My issue, though, is like I'm still not completely sold on Exile, man. Like he still seems to go off a little bit sometimes, and it concerns me. They've got really good leadership with Boomich. I think Boomich is honestly a really solid IGL. But then you look at the teams that they beat. They beat Ecstatic, all right, fair enough. They beat Legacy and they beat Saw. So 2 out of the 3 teams they beat didn't even make it through to the next stage. And even then, there was a couple of scrappy moments where they nearly didn't get those Ws. So I am a little bit less on Cloud9 than some people are. Complexity hurts because I think Complexity can definitely make it through. I'll be interested to see what Elysian the boys do, and I kind of hope they prove me wrong, to be honest. It would be really cool to have sort of an NA team go far in this tournament. But now looking at the 0-3 side of things, I think Imperial are probably the first team that come to mind when I'm really like assessing the teams that I don't think are going to have any success here. On top of that one as well, They're playing against, what is it, VP in their first game. Let me double check this. Yes, they are. I think that's a very difficult game for them to get a W on, as VP actually coming to this tournament in pretty good form themselves. So I think Imperial are probably the most likely to go 0-3 here. And it really hurts me to do this, but I think I'm going to have to go for the Mongols as my second pick. I think Fury have got a win in them. They weren't ideal in the opening two games. They, going 0-2 down. They didn't beat or lose to a team that made it through. I understand those caveats, but I still feel like when you have Fallen, the tutelage that he brings, the experience that he brings, you have Yuri and K Serato, there's always a chance of a win with Fury, I think. Whereas the Mongols, if you look at how they started the tournament, they lost to Eternal Fire, fair enough, but it was a very one-sided loss. I think it was like 13-6, and it could have been a lot more than that. They then lost to Ecstatic. They beat Amcal, but Amcal should have had a W over them, for being honest. The last map was 13-10 on Inferno, and Amcal choked it big time. They then beat Lin Vision 2-0, which is an Asian derby that they've played a million times and always seem to win. And they beat Legacy 2-0. So, like, you're looking at the teams that they basically beat, and none of them are, S tier fantastic teams. Even though Legacy did better than expected, I think Amcal did worse than I expected them to. And Lin Vision, it's not a freebie. I don't want to take anything away from the Mongols in that regard, but it's like it's an Asian derby that you've played a lot. You know each other very well. You always seem to get the upper hand in for the most part. They played against each other in the Asian RMRs and they blitzed them, and it was super easy. So I'm gonna go for the Mongols to 0-3. It hurts me, but I think kicking things off against Na'Vi is a tough one. I think you then go down into this really scrappy sort of like 0-1 bracket where you could be having some big teams like Heroic and Cloud9 and some other ones like that. So yeah, it kind of sucks. Those are my pick'ems though. Do you agree or do you disagree? Let me know in the comment section below. And also, how did you do in the previous pick'ems? Are you one of the few Giga Chads that is still on for the diamond? If you are, I bow to you. Well done. And well, I've gone for a different tactic here. So let's see if I end up being correct. We'll save those picks, and I'll see you in the next video where I'll be discussing my HLTV Fantasy League picks. Catch you there.